Dozens of students camping out at two local universities to protest the war in Gaza.
These tent encampments popping up at MIT and Emerson College. WBZ's Jordan Jagelinzer is here in studio with the details this morning. Jordan?
Well, Kate and Chris, students at Emerson tell us early this morning that they're inspired by the ongoing protests at Columbia University in New York. More than 100 people have been arrested there, with Columbia now giving students the option of remote learning. As Passover begins tonight, some Jewish students say they don't feel safe on campus. Meantime, students protesting at MIT posting to social media saying they are pushing for the college to cut research ties with the Israeli military. Now, you can see here on your screen the dozens of tents that are set up there at MIT. Students out protesting tell us they have been in talks with the Emerson administration overnight.
Tonight we're gathered here and we're not going to leave until our demands are met or we're dragged away by police.
We have reached out to Boston police about the encampment there at Emerson, but we have not yet heard back. Jordan Jagelinzer, WBZ News.
Our top stories this Monday. Tents have now been set up at 3 Boston area campuses as students protest the war in Gaza. So far, WBZ has confirmed protests at MIT, Emerson, and Tufts. Student organizers say they're showing solidarity with students at Columbia University in New York. Emerson sent us a statement saying, in part, the college strongly supports the right to express one's beliefs through protest, but will not tolerate actions threatening safety, operations, or educational access. Meanwhile, the Harvard Crimson is reporting that Harvard has restricted access to Harvard Yard until Friday afternoon in anticipation of student protests. Harvard is also warning that it could take disciplinary measures against students and affiliates who bring unauthorized structures, such as tents, or block access to the school's entrances.
Anti-war camps are popping up on local college campuses. This is Sky Eye video over MIT, where you can see protesters gathering on a huge tarp surrounded by tents.
And it was a similar scene at Emerson College, students camping out in an alley off Boylston Street, chanting "Free Palestine."
And at Tufts University, students have set up about a half dozen tents on the campus there. And these demonstrations being inspired by Columbia University students who have been protesting the war in Gaza.
But there is growing concern for the safety of Jewish students at these schools. WBZ's Louisa Moeller is at MIT with more on the turmoil at major universities.
They're the same chants that have rung out at colleges for months, but this time with tents. Pro-Palestinian demonstrators outside Emerson College say they have no intention of leaving this alleyway next to Boylston Street until their demands are met.
To disclose all Zionist entities, the financial ties that we have with them, and then to divest from such ties.
Encampments like this one began forming at more local colleges this weekend. At MIT.
MIT is doing war research that's going towards the genocide in Gaza, and we're here calling on MIT to take the moral act of cutting that war research.
And Tufts University. Harvard Yard was closed. The local protests cropping up after a chaotic weekend at Columbia University. Columbia decided to hold classes remotely Monday after dozens of pro-Palestinian demonstrators were arrested outside the New York City school, and several moments when protesters yelled anti-Semitic or threatening statements at Jewish students. Patriots owner Robert Kraft, a Columbia graduate and donor who founded the school's Kraft Center for Jewish Life, weighed in with this statement, saying in part, "I am no longer confident that Columbia can protect its students and staff, and I am not comfortable supporting the university until corrective action is taken."
I was in there shooting yesterday, and someone told me no Zionists are allowed in this part of the alley. And I was like, I live here. I pay tuition here.
Margot Jubin, a Jewish Emerson student who lives near the ongoing protest, says she also feels threatened.
A lot of my friends don't feel safe to leave our buildings.
And Eitan Moore, an MIT sophomore, says his university can still do more to protect Jewish students.
Any institution that's trying to function has to be able to enforce its rules, enforce the policies, and that's something that hasn't happened.
Louisa Moeller, WBZ News.
Live look right now at the MIT campus where a pro-Palestinian protest is about to get underway. And the rally is hardly the end to these protests.
Demonstrators say they've been planning to stay as long as necessary. WBZ's Louisa Moeller's live for us in Cambridge tonight with the very latest. Louisa.
Well, David and Lisa, you know, protests and rallies are one thing. The one that's expected to take place soon behind me, organized by a Jewish group calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. But a unique part of this situation is the encampment, the tents, a very fine line for law enforcement universities to walk, especially one at Emerson College, which is in a public alley.
The signs are all over this alley and these tents that Emerson students demonstrating for Palestine don't plan on leaving here anytime soon.
We're here until the demands are met or we get dragged away by police.
Like Emerson senior Owen Buxton, who slept in the alley the last 2 nights. He says he was joined by 50 to 60 others, not all students.
A lot of community members, a lot of unhoused individuals have kind of joined our camp, and like getting to meet them and talk to them has been like honestly incredible.
The alley is a public way, with students and other city-goers walking through. WBZ security analyst Ed Davis says it reminds him of the Occupy Wall Street movement, when protesters also pitched tents on public property.
During Occupy Wall Street, Mayor Menino and Bill Sennett and I would meet daily on what was happening, and we devised a plan that included the courts to weigh in on whether our actions were constitutional.
That's why Davis says Emerson and law enforcement must walk a fine line with this protest.
You have a right to free speech, but you don't have a right to violate someone else's rights.
Jewish Emerson student Margot Jubin returned to her dorm in this alley after Passover Seder last night. She says what happened next makes her question whether her rights are being protected.
So they were all like linking arms, kind of blocking off the front of the alleyway. I was like, guys, I live here, like, can you please let me through? And they all just stared at me, like dead in the face like this.
Ultimately, Margot says 2 girls let her through.
Why do you guys have the authority to decide who gets to go through?
Now, we reached out to Emerson, Boston Police, Mayor Wu's office about how the Emerson encampment is being monitored and didn't get a comment back. MIT says that this encampment is small enough and that faculty and police are constantly watching it. Live in Cambridge, Louisa Moeller, WBZ News.
Louisa, thank you.
What started at Columbia University has spread to colleges in Massachusetts and beyond. Pro-Palestinian students protesting the war between Israel and Hamas. But are the students helping or hurting their cause? WBZ's John Keller compares today's demonstrations to protests of the past.
Student protests have been a catalyst for many of the most important reforms in American history.
Since at least the 1930s, campus protesters have challenged the status quo on issues of war, race, and social equality. In the 1960s and early 70s, the anti-Vietnam War movement spawned on campus successfully argued for ending the draft and giving peace a chance. But protest historian Stephen Mintz notes it came at a political cost.
The student protests of the 1960s produced a backlash that resulted in 40 years of conservative ascendancy.
While it was later deemed a police riot, violence at protests during the 1968 Democratic Convention in Chicago was believed to have fueled a 7% vote swing toward Republican nominee Richard Nixon.
What's going on at the college level and the colleges, Columbia, NYU and others, is a disgrace.
No wonder the presumptive GOP nominee today senses opportunity, even though President Biden is a prime target of the current wave of campus unrest.
Their protests are threatening basic civility in our society.
To Professor Mintz, these protesters mostly lack achievable goals or a message that can inspire Americans.
If the goal of the protests was to develop sympathy, empathy for the suffering of people in Gaza, it's done almost the exact opposite.
And John, you know, it's interesting. Polls show backing for American aid to Israel has been weakened by the war.
Yep.
But you'd think these protesters would be winning support, but they're not. Why do you think?
Well,
Several reasons, according to Professor Mintz, Paula. He cited the embrace by many of them of Hamas tactics that horrify most Americans, completely unrealistic demands for radical changes in university policies, hostility toward fellow students and others who don't automatically agree with them, and extreme political naivete. You know, Vietnam-era protesters, they were calling for peace. Too many of these protesters carry signs calling for more violence, not a winning argument.
John Keller, thanks. Protesters have now camped out in Harvard Yard. As you see here, tents, groups of people gathering, despite the fact that the school is restricting access to that area. This is now the 4th student encampment in the Boston area. Sky Eye over Harvard Yard this afternoon. The student-run newspaper, The Crimson, is reporting that students from various freshman dorms came out cheering and carrying tent equipment. As you can see, multiple tents have already been set up there on the lawn in front of the statue of John Harvard. This encampment comes just 2 days after the school had announced that it was restricting access to anyone in the yard until Friday to prevent this protest. The university also said that students who violate these policies are subject to disciplinary action.
Breaking news.
Body camera video from Boston police showing the moments just before officers broke up an encampment by protesting Emerson College students. Officers took more than 100 people into custody. Many of them were students, and dozens just appeared before a judge. We have live team coverage beginning with WBZ's Christina Hager, who's live outside the courthouse in Boston. Christina?
Yeah, Paula, some of the 108 Emerson College students who were arrested appeared here in court just a little while ago, Boston Municipal Court, and they were not arraigned yet, but court dates were set for next week. And Boston Police, we want to show you some of the video that they just released. Boston Police body camera video of officers approaching, telling students they support their right to free speech, but that the students need to move on and to clear that alleyway where their tents were set up. The police then tore down the students' pro-Palestinian encampment in the Boylston Place alley. This all started just before 2 a.m. and later prompted the university to cancel classes for today. That encampment, by the way, that started Sunday night in solidarity with students at Columbia University who had just had a similar clash last week in New York City. And here's what students here told us about what happened this morning here in court.
I don't think that they needed to use full riot gear. I don't think that they needed to slam people into statues and then slam people into the ground. You can arrest people without assaulting them.
Immense, intense escalation from Boston police on a peaceful protest. There was a lot of brutality used. There was riot gear used, tear gas.
Now, Boston police tell us a different story. They say 4 officers were injured. None of those injuries life-threatening, but one was reportedly serious. And as far as the students, there were attorneys here from some different organizations volunteering to help them with their legal issues once they have to appear for their arraignments back here at Boston Municipal Court next week. Live in Boston, Christina Hager, WBZ News.
All right, Christina, thanks. Emerson administrators canceled classes for today, and the school is working to clean up the area now. WBZ's Penny Commit shows us what happened when police moved in early this morning.
A chaotic overnight clash between pro-Palestine student protesters at Emerson College and Boston police, resulting in over 100 students being arrested and 4 officers injured as tensions boiled over following a multi-day encampment protest in a public alleyway off Boylston Street.
There were people getting thrown down to the ground, arms put behind their back, dragged away.
Earlier this week, protesters were informed that their encampment violated Boston City ordinance and were told to disperse. Despite this warning, students said they weren't leaving until demands were met.
Disclose all financial ties, divest from Israel. We're going to stay until our demands are met or until we are forcibly dragged out.
That moment came early Thursday morning. Students say police arrived around 1:30 and asked students to leave on their own.
They refused to comply with the police, and within 5-10 minutes, the police vans, they pulled up and then they started forcing their way into the encampment.
Video shows violent encounters between protesters and police, with officers eventually throwing students to the ground and placing them under arrest. We spoke with student protesters who wish to remain anonymous, but claim that until confronted by police, their protests remain peaceful.
They kept being like, this is your last chance. If you are here, you will be arrested. But they didn't start saying things like that until after they had already started grabbing and dragging people out. So it was not so much a last chance of not being arrested, more so a last chance of not being brutalized.
Police spent the rest of the morning cleaning up the alleyway, throwing away signs and taking down Palestinian flags. With all Emerson classes canceled today, student protesters say they're focused on getting their friends out of police custody.
Right now, it is mostly an effort of gathering back everyone who has been taken from us.
And while this encampment has been cleared, there are still pro-Palestine protests going on at other local universities. That includes at Harvard, MIT, and Tufts. In Boston, I'm Penny Commit, WBZ News.
Now at 6, tension is spreading, leading to confrontations on campus. Sky high over Northeastern, where police surrounded students earlier before backing away. University police are on scene with about 100 students. It is the latest demonstration in what has become a growing movement on campuses all across the country.
Yeah, students are clashing with police as they protest the Israel-Hamas war. And our live team coverage begins now with WBZ's Laura Hafley at Northeastern University in Boston. Laura?
As we head into the evening hours, protesters are still here on the Northeastern campus. You can see them occupying this portion of the property despite facing school officials and police. But they're not alone. They're joined by professors and faculty supporting the demonstration. And we did get a chance to speak to members of the Jewish community here at Northeastern, hoping these protests end soon. Pro-Palestinian protesters at Northeastern were confronted by the Boston Police Department Thursday after being asked by school officials to show their student IDs. The group did not comply. The Boston Police Department and campus police readied to zip tie and arrest demonstrators, but eventually left the campus. It's unclear why. Students refused to speak to us, but chanted phrases like "Free Palestine" and "Don't talk to police," supported by Northeastern faculty and professors, encouraging what they say is their right to protest.
They're calling for peace, a ceasefire, an end to the violence, and we want to make sure that those students' voices are heard. And we, as professors, have a responsibility to look after our students' welfare.
I would say where I'm most upset is the professors standing over there. Their shirts say something like, "The faculty, we support our students," not the students that walk around making themselves obviously Jewish day after day.
Israeli students and members of the Northeastern Jewish community not happy with what they call misinformed messaging.
A lot of my peers, rightfully so, are extremely fearful. If it were up to me, everyone would have been either told to leave, disperse, or be arrested.
Protests continue into the evening hours at Northeastern. Demonstrators tell us they have no plans to leave anytime soon. Certainly a lot of tension here on the Northeastern campus, though this group behind me energized, planning on staying throughout the night, continuing to promote their message here. It's unclear if the Boston Police Department will be back. We did reach out to Northeastern for comment. We did not hear back. In Boston, Laura Hafley, WBZ News.
All right, Laura, thank you.
From Israel.
To divest from those organizations.
To divest from genocide.
Now at 5:30, the word we keep hearing over and over from students who are protesting the war in Gaza on college campuses. The word, divest. But what does that involve? Thanks for staying with us. I'm David Wade.
I'm Paula Eben. The students are protesting the war itself, but also making specific demands of their schools. WBZ's Tiffany Chan takes a look at exactly what they want.
Students here in Cambridge and around the country are demanding that academic institutions divest or withhold money from the Israeli military.
Divestment works as a political instrument.
But how are tuition dollars and donations linked to the war in Gaza? Harvard Medical School lecturer Dr. Jim Recht, a supporter of these encampments, explains.
Undisclosed portion of Harvard's endowment generates profit for Harvard by investing in the manufacture and sales of arms, military equipment. The students recognize that there's a clear link here between the tuition that they pay and the perpetuation of violence and oppression.
While some schools like Tufts University have made it clear they do not support the movement for divestment, these tents at MIT are a symbol of that demand on campus.
I'd look at it as, students that are attempting to express themselves.
With financial endowments in the billions at many colleges and universities, Dr. Rex says while the dollar value is important, so is the underlying message that it sends.
Even if they're not able to withdraw every last dollar, they could today or tomorrow say, we abhor this behavior. We abhor the behavior and policies of the Israeli government.
From Cambridge, I'm Tiffany Chan, WBZ.